I'm honored to speak in front of patriots today and always humbled to do my small part to foment the revolution, as it were. Daniel Webster once warned, "It is hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters." I'm here today to describe to you what I've called the dossier of dictatorship that's being compiled by those who would be our good masters. This ever-expanding file contains several congressional acts and executive orders that had the incremental effect of eroding the bedrock principles upon which our Constitution was founded. First up, as Bill mentioned, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, and to bring you up to date, the 2013 version is about to be voted on next week, in which all the indefinite detention provisions are maintained. So please do something about that. Call your member of Congress and let him know or her know that you don't agree. As I've reported in the New American since it was first proposed, of all the evils perpetrated by the NDAA, one of the most sinister is the denial of due process to all those detained under its provisions. Section 1021 of the NDAA is unqualifiedly the most pernicious piece of legislation in the history of the United States, moving the Constitution in our republic closer to despotism than any other single paragraph ever could. In a nutshell, Section 1021 permits the President to order the armed forces of the United States to arrest and indefinitely detain any American citizen suspected by him of posing a military threat to our national security. These alleged belligerents may then be detained in a federal prison until the cessation of hostilities. That is to say, never. Without recourse to an attorney, without being informed of charges, all in hostile violation of the habeas corpus protections of the Constitution. Although the President now wields this enormous power, he adamantly denies that he will ever, quote, authorize the indefinite military detention without trial of American citizens. So that guarantee is all that stands between you and life in prison on arbitrary charges of conspiring to commit or committing, quote, acts belligerent to the homeland, unquote. The President continued by explaining that to indefinitely detain American citizens without trial and without charges, quote, would break with our most important tradition and values as a nation. This undoubtedly illusory promise to preserve the most fundamental of American civil liberties reminds me of a statement made by Thomas Jefferson. First, government is founded on jealousy, not confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind those we are obliged to trust with power. In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in men, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Add that little timely bit of prophetic exhortation to the fact that the President's signing statement where he made this little promise is not only unconstitutional, but of no legal authority whatsoever. And all you have is the equation that leads to immediate and lasting tyranny of the executive. While all this proves to be, his promises prove to be something to mollify some section of our country, there is another bill that would gut the promise the President made. Last October, soon-to-be retired Senator Joseph Lieberman introduced an amendment to the Immigration and Nationality Act that would grant to the federal government the power to permanently divest American of his citizenship if he is suspected of supporting hostilities against the homeland. This is known as the Enemy Expatriation Act. It augments the power of the federal government by allowing it to strip a suspect of his American citizenship based on nothing more than suspicion of, quote, engaging in or purposefully or material supporting hostilities. A careful reading of this reveals that these acts are suffocating the American body politic, cutting us off to the air of liberty by which we are made free. And typically, none of those important terms are defined. Hostilities, not defined. It's defined as however the president or some congressional panel wants to define it. And legally, the term can mean any conflict subject to the laws of war. But considering the fact that the war on terror is never going to end and is ill-defined, basically any action that could be labeled contrary to the policies of the president or the Congress will be seen as hostile. And as such, if you are suspected of that and arrested under terms of the Enemy Expatriation Act, you'll be stripped of your citizenship. And then thanks to the NDAA, you'll be shipped off to Gitmo without charge, without access to an attorney until the war on terror is over. That's the situation in the United States today. That's not pretend, and that's not someone 20 years ago telling you what could happen. That's the country we live in today. Next up, the next I call tyrannical text in this dossier of dictatorship is H.R. 347, the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act. Sounds like something about gardening, keeping the lawn at the White House nice and short. Got to practice your putting game. You might assume that that's what that is, when in fact it is something much more despicable. These are those good intentions that Daniel Webster talked about. In one section of this new legislation, H.R. 347, individuals are expressly forbidden under penalty of law from trespassing onto the grounds of the White House. That's always been illegal. There's already a law, a D.C. ordinance saying that if you trespass on the ground of the White House, it's a criminal act. Well, now, the penalties of such trespass are more severe. Congress may, at its discretion, impose federal criminal charges, not only of those who enter the White House grounds without permission, but on anyone who participates in protests at or near a location falling within the greatly enlarged scope of this new prohibited zone, as it's called. In addition to the increased legal ramifications for trespassing, the penalty for protesting within this shifting high security zone is enough to give pause to those contemplating participation in a protest against a government official or a government policy. It is possible, under applicable provisions of H.R. 347, that a person could attend a speech by one of the GOP contenders, for example, or Attorney General Holder, and unintentionally find himself within the prohibited zone and be subject to imprisonment in a federal prison. A straightforward reading of this bill reveals that it is a threat to freedom of association and the freedom of speech. As written and as passed by Congress, there is nothing that would prevent the application of the relevant provisions of H.R. 347 to an innocent person protesting against this or that policy of a presidential candidate while standing outside a debate venue, for example. You wouldn't know you're inside the prohibited zone, but you would know when you're being escorted to a federal prison for having violated it. Finally, the last document. On March 16th, President Barack Obama signed an executive order giving himself absolute control over all the country's natural resources in case of natural disaster or time of war. In this order, the National Defense Resources Preparedness Order, the President granted to himself authority to approve the dispensing of all domestic energy, production, transportation, food, water supply, as he deems necessary to protect the homeland. Despite the national defense hurdle, there is language in this document that allows the President to take these acts in peacetime if he sees fit. The President can invoke these powers of this order, quote, to meet national defense requirements or in a full spectrum of emergencies. Just how expansive are these powers? And what is included in the scope? Livestock? Yes. All food resources and resource facilities, read grocery stores? Yes. Veterinary clinics? Yes. All form of energy? Yes. Will the President control the water supply? Yes. The last line of Section 201 of this executive order gives the President the power to control the general distribution of any material in the civilian market. This seems to be no less than the nationalization of food, energy, water, and healthcare pipeline and providers in this country. Any student of history can testify, when government begins to interfere with the free flow of goods and commodities, then it may manipulate the availability of these items and the prices thereof. Typically, such fluctuations result in civil disturbances and a demand for greater security from those unwilling to abide by these new laws. In exchange for greater security, those clamoring for it are typically willing to give up their fundamental freedoms. The White House has issued no statement regarding why this had to be passed or had to be issued now, this order. Could have something to do with the Middle East. It could have something to do with his algae initiative. I don't know. Perhaps the president is taking the first few steps necessary to cloak him in the powers required to legally step outside the bounds of his constitutional authority and ascend to a level of supervision witnessed in all the former republics of history just before their dissolution into mobocracy and mayhem. That is America that we live in. That is not an America that we're warning people about. That is the country you live in. I've been carrying this Constitution since 1987, my freshman year at BYU. I was given this by the illustrious Senator Orrin Hatch, which is ironic considering I don't think he's ever read it. But there's one thing about this, it's never changed. It's been too many years than I'd like to admit now, but it's never changed. There's something in here. It's called the so-called Supremacy Clause. Have you heard of it? Right. It's often quoted by members of Congress and the President and those who oppose states' rights to say that acts of the federal government are supreme and trump state laws. They're forgetting one little phrase in that. It says, all federal laws that are made in pursuance thereof, not in violation thereof. So, take a look at, how many of y'all have one of these? Not this identical one, obviously. Article 1, Section 8. I can just tell you, the power to force every American, regardless of personal choice, to buy health insurance, not in there. Power to keep a kill list of Americans targeted for death by drone, not in there. Power to suppress speech and prevent opposition, not in there. The power to declare peacetime martial law and seize control of food, water, and energy, not in there. The power to permanently imprison American citizens without charge, trial, or due process, not in there. So, in November, what we need to say to Barack Hussein Obama and the White House, not in there. Just really quickly, let me wrap up. We need to understand that preventing the re-election of Barack Obama is just the first step. There are hundreds of co-conspirators in Congress with him. And let's not soft pedal it. There are men and women serving as representatives of the people whose plan extend beyond obliteration of the Constitution to the abolition of freedom worldwide. There once was an influential book called None Dare Call It Treason. Y'all read that book? Yeah. Hope you own that book. The question is, do we dare call it treason? Is it treasonous for a president to order the CIA to track down and kill 3 American citizens, one of whom was a 15-year-old boy, without charge, trial, or due process? Is that treason? Is it treason for Congress to pass a law criminalizing the protests of the president or his designated VIPs? Is it treasonous to abolish the due process rights afforded to Americans? The answer is yes. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, for a declaration of allegiances. Come out and courageously proclaim your loyalty. Don't draw near unto us with your lips while your voting record and personal morality are far from us. We don't need sunshine patriots or compassionate conservatives. We don't need rhinos. We don't need wolves in sheep's clothing. We don't want capitulators, compromisers, or cowards. We need men and women who care less for popularity or personal promotion than for the zealous defense of our country and our Constitution. Remember the words of Sam Adams, if you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands that feed you, and may your chains sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Today is the day we refuse to be labeled as Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Tea Partiers. From this day forward, we proudly gather around the banner of the Constitution, and we refuse to be moved, mocked, or manipulated. Edward Livingston said, "Whenever our laws manifestly infringe the Constitution under which they were made, the people ought not hesitate, which they should obey. If we exceed our powers, we become tyrants, and our acts have no effect." I ask you, has Congress exceeded their powers, and have they become tyrants? Which is more seditious, to defy the Constitution or defend it, to ignore it or enforce it? I pray that the God whose almighty hand laid the foundation of this most blessed nation give us the wisdom, strength, and courage necessary to reclaim the rights that he alone gave us, and may we no longer allow anyone to unrighteously or unlawfully take those rights away from us. Thank you.